The nature of evil is composed of characteristics particular to evil and destructive towards lands, societies, and peoples. Tolkien shows this through Thorin's greed for the Arkenstone, Smaug's lust for his gold, and Gollum's obsession with his ring. Tolkien shows greed to be the root of all evil and its consequences. Tolkien also portrays morality as a dichotomy between good and evil. Smaug destroys Aragorn in the City of Dale, while it is not unlikely that the goblins have invented some of the machines that have since troubled the world. Opposing this is the elves, who grew fairer and wiser and made many beautiful and wondrous things, and as well as the hobbits, who, the less grand, were good-natured and with deep, fruity laughs. Tolkien's Catholicism also influenced this novel and shows that it could be a parable, warning of the nature of evil and how to thwart it. Combined with the fact this is a children's novel, this clearly shows that Tolkien wished to impart wisdom that is especially pertinent to future generations. Greed is a key aspect of evil, and Smaug, the Master, and Thorin aptly show this. Evil thrives where there is suffering and destruction, and will isolate you. The listing here overwhelms the reader with detail and highlights the enormity of the wealth that Smaug alone has access to and uses. That which he could not use or did not want, he destroyed. The extremes, all, no, and anyone, highlights the totality of the destruction and death around him. He did not just sleep on treasure for a bed and keep out intruders, but would actively go out and wreak havoc until Dome was ruined. The verbs crept and crawl also show that he is an ignoble creature who uses underhanded methods to achieve his goals. Crawl implies lowliness, and as height often confers status. This shows that Smaug is a creature beneath respect and of low status. There's also a lexical field of passing time, then, after that, now, and later, which shows that even as evil has not been seen for a long time, even the possibility of its presence still evokes fear. Smaug's greed takes form in his covetous desire to cause grief to all interlopers who would try to thwart his desires. Tolkien's description of Smaug's rage at the discovery of the absence of his cup aptly shows this. Compared to the piles of countless precious things, this cup was nothing. The short single-worded exclamation, thieves, fire, and murder, satirizes his rage, as the next sentence clearly shows that this had not happened since he first came to the mountain. In other words, Smaug was the first thief, fire, and murderer. The metaphor shook the mountain roots, combined with the simile, roaring like thunder underground, shows the sheer power of his rage, while the listing clauses add to the pace of the piece and show his speed and power. No matter how minuscule the object of desire, knowing that someone else has thwarted their desires is what drives the dragons in human beings to destroy and torment. Smaug, however, is not the only one whose lust for wealth consumes him. The Master is also shown to be equally deceitful and greedy. The Lexis, expensive in business, shows that the Master's priority is with money and material goods. This also foreshadows his later dragon sickness and unfortunate end, in which he dies alone in the waste, deserted by his companions, alone with the gold he had stolen from the rebuilding of Lake Town. The juxtaposition of his thoughts and words also highlights his deceit and cowardice. The malicious tone of his thoughts is not in agreement with the fact he has consented to Thorin's ideas and has not opposed them despite not believing it. Read as an allegory, this shows that all wielders of power, such as the Master, are more eloquent and business-minded than honest and good as they should be. Those who seem trustworthy are not necessarily so. Tolkien's choice in the Master's fate also shows that those who are obsessed with their wealth and material goods it will lead to their death and complete isolation from those around them. However, greed is also shown to be able to infect others and corrupt those who are good. This is shown through Thorin's change in attitude towards the treasure, as well as his reaction to Bilbo having given the Arkenstone to the elves. The heavy vowel sounds long, last, and lust stress the weight and depth of Thorin's obsession with the gold, the more time he spends with it. This is also explicitly shown in It Was Heavy on Him. The juxtaposition of a wonderful thing with the labors and sorrows of his race highlight that for all the beauty, glitter, and finery of the treasure around him, it is still imbued with the pain of the dwarves having been driven from their home. The metaphor wound old memories shows that the gold is completely surrounded by the old memories of their loss. However, it also invites the interpretation of them being wounds, as shown by wound, which can also be read as wound, physicalizing the pain of the loss of the dwarves. The contrasting structure, though and yet, also highlights that even though the Arkenstone is the symbol of dwarvish history and civilization, it has become more and more neglected in favor of the quantity of treasure rather than something of historical significance. In other words, one of the aspects of evil which Tolkien portrays is how a disconnect from the past leads to disconnect from the past and your friends leads to evil. Tolkien also draws an interesting parallel between Thorin's desire for the Arkenstone and Gollum's obsession with the ring. A lexical field of shock shows how great a loss Thorin feels at seeing that his jewel has been taken from him. This is the juxtaposing description of Bilbo creates humor as well, as it shows that he's a bit silly for desiring what is really a piece of rock over the relations with his friends and making sure that those around him can also rebuild their own homes which they lost. And the exclamatives and direct address of you, and you shows that he believes that Bilbo is the sheer cause of his misery, and he's blinded from what is really happening around him. Another lexical field of negative emotions surfaces at Gollum's discovery that he's lost the ring, as shown by hated, despair, and menacing. This contrasts to his earlier attitude being quite polite and anxious to appear friendly to Bilbo, though we really do know that his ulterior motive at the time was to find out whether Bilbo was good to eat. The repetition of lost, thief, and we hates it reiterates his complete obsession with the ring and hatred for Bilbo. The verb choice of he dared not go further, along with the metaphor blood-curdling, shows that Gollum is completely dependent on the ring. In other words, without his material good, he's completely without hope. The only thing he cared for, combined with the emotive verbs cry and shriek, also shows that he's completely emotionally bound to the ring, and thus isolated from the world around him. It is not interaction with other people that brings him joy, it is possession. Both times the objects of desire are out of reach. Bilbo is branded as a thief by Thorin and Gollum. The lexical field in both scenes shows strong negative emotions and feelings of hatred towards him. Smaug also reacts with rage, as we saw earlier. So Tolkien shows that evil distorts our perception of reality and also our moral values as a result. Our ways of knowing, such as emotion, sense perception, and reason, can be warped, and this leads to a disproportional reaction to material loss and a consuming desire for revenge and reacquisition of that object. And so Tolkien not only shows that ways of knowing heavily influence each other, but that a distortion between them leads to evil. Although Thorin never quite dismissed the gold in the beginning, his first priority was to reclaim his home, with the gold more of an afterthought than it later became. This gold lust diffused from Smaug to Thorin, and it wasn't even through use of the gold, just possession of it. This greed corrupted his nostalgia for his old home and the glory of the dwarves, twisting it into something that would make him desire to brood in the darkness and hate all those who would disturb him and his treasure. Once the object of the desire was taken from him, shock and desperation ensued. This desperation can lead to recklessness and even a madness in a sad attempt to reclaim what has been lost, and even killing those or harming others who would try to help you. As an allegory, read as an allegory, this could show that evil can even begin in the smallest of desires, wanting to reclaim a home, but become a greater evil later, in becoming closed off from the world around you and consumed by that sole desire, and harming others with your lack of consideration and empathy. And thus Tolkien shows us the dangers of materialism, and how if we are consumed by it, we become like Smaug, Gollum, and Thorin. All of them die alone, unhappy, but with their objects of desire. Greed not only destroys those around it, but the person who's greedy as well. Applying to our own context here in Hong Kong, we can read this as Tolkien's message about our oligarchy. Despite being lauded by the Heritage Foundation, the wealth disparity in Hong Kong has become so huge that we have the biggest wealth gap in Asia. Our own versions of the masters of Lake Town are so consumed with their own public images, such as their public image after finding out illegal constructions were on the rooftop, means that we walk past crippled beggars on our way home from an expensive education, and while the natural world is destroyed around us. Hong Kong is a treasure hoard, but 1 in 6 people here live under the poverty line. Drawing further parallels between our home and the Hobbit, it is clear that we must address these issues before it leads to further destruction, grief, rage, and even more greed. Any questions?
The goblins are obviously evil too, but what does Tolkien say about the nature of evil through them?
The nature of evil portrayed by the golems is primarily their sadism and love of destruction. This is shown quite clearly when they're first introduced in chapter 4, in which they're described as delighting in the suffering of others, and while they're slaves and prisoners, in fact, died for want of air and water. So they're enjoying depriving others of their basic necessities, but also not wanting to have a physical connection to it and not wanting to get their hands dirty. This is Tolkien's way of also criticizing the industrialization and modernization of his era, in which it had become easier to destroy large numbers of people without emotional connection to it. So he's warning us of the dangers of that. Yep, Tony?
You kind of contradicted yourself when you were talking about the Arkenstone. How can it be both a symbol of garbage history and just a piece of rock?
Well, in the first scene that I described there, the Arkenstone is compared to the gold, and the Arkenstone here obviously has historical significance and value, whereas the gold is surrounded by the old memories of pain and loss. In the second instance, however, he's choosing that material object over what it represents. He's trying to throttle Bilbo over wanting to share the wealth and rebuild their homes. And so Tolkien sets up a hierarchy of importance. So material wealth is at the bottom, objects of historical significance in the middle, but empathy and friendship is at the top and should be cared for above